Welcome to another special Talking Feds one-on-one. We are really privileged to again be joined by Michael Oren, former ambassador for Israel to the United States, former member of the Knesset, prolific historian, and now very public spokesperson for the Israeli position and cause. This is our second discussion with him, and last time we mainly talked about the situation inside Israel. Today I wanted to focus more on Israel's position in the world community in general, and we tape at a juncture, Wednesday, November 29th, when the cessation of hostilities has been extended, but doesn't appear that it will go much longer. And at that point, I think the pressure on Israel will potentially redouble. Michael, thanks so much for being here again.
Good to be back with you.
As I mentioned, I want to mainly go around the world to Israel's position, but let me just start in Israel itself. You know, the country's been very clear to try to adjust expectations that it's in no way in agreeing to this cessation of hostilities, renouncing its objective of disarming Hamas, getting the hostages home. But I assume that the calculations in advance were very clear-eyed that there's going to be an outcry when the military mission resumes, if it resumes. And I wonder what Israel's thinking at the time was in agreeing to the cessation, which we're told at first there was significant opposition within the government for, and then everyone came around to fairly enthusiastic support. But this day, which is coming fast, was always in the offing. What was the thinking then, and the overall thinking for why Israel eventually readily agreed and has agreed to these extensions of the cessation itself?
Well, to understand the answer to that question, you have to go back to October 7th. Now, usually when an enemy, one of the Arab states or a terrorist organizations attacks us, they kill a certain number of our citizens, and then we attack back. It's simple. But Hamas did something else. It not only attacked us and killed our citizens, it also took over 240 hostages. And that's never happened before. Now, the state of Israel came into being not just as a Jewish and democratic state, it came into a state that made two promises to its citizens: to defend the land and ensure that we maintained our deterrence power, and to defend the citizens of the land. Now, those seem almost the same thing, but in Israel, they're very different things. And for 75 years, they were compatible. And all of a sudden, on October 7th, they became mutually exclusive. And I'll explain. I guess the best explanation was a conversation I had with my own children, both of whom are combat veterans of the Army. My daughter says, the state of Israel promised me, the mother of my children, that if my children go into the Army and they fall prisoner, the state of Israel will do everything that's in power to bring those children home. And on that basis, I send my kids to the Army. If the state of Israel has hostages and doesn't do everything in its power to get the hostages back, I will not be able to send my kids to the Army. That covenant will be broken. My son said, if we do not restore our deterrence power, if we do not defeat Hamas, then you won't have an army to send your kids to. Get it? So what Israel did for the first month and a half of this war was to try to do both. Was try to destroy Hamas and get the hostages back. Though it is clear in the long run, a terrible decision is going to have to be made, one or the other, because Hamas won't release all the hostages. Hamas knows that once the last of the hostages are released, Israel will flood the tunnels, it will set fire to the tunnels, and Hamas will be destroyed. And at the same time we were fighting Hamas to destroy Hamas, we're trying to get the hostages released. So what you saw was a series of ceasefires that were designed to sort of, take a middle road between the two promises that Israel had made to its citizens, and trying to keep both at the same time, even though down the line you can't do both. I mean, we may be coming down to that point now, a very, very painful point. I guess people in the government were saying, let's get the maximum number of women and children out while we can now. And we're going to pay a price. We're going to pay two prices. First of all, we're going to pay a military price because Hamas is going to use those ceasefires to reorganize, to regroup, to rearm, to put more booby traps out. So we'll be saving hostages' lives, but it'll be costing us soldiers' lives. And that's another painful decision. The second reason is the strategic diplomatic issue, because Israel now is fighting a ceasefire. The worst thing that can happen to Israel, truly the worst thing, is a ceasefire. Ceasefire means that Hamas
you have
wins.
not you hold completely to your position that it would be I think you put it in very strong terms, but a ceasefire would be existential.
Existential.
That's unabated for you anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for most people in the state of Israel, they understand that if Hamas wins, and ceasefire means Hamas wins, gets away with mass murder, Israel has no internal security whatsoever. There's 250,000 people who have left their homes. They can't go back to those homes on the border. They can't. I wouldn't even be secure in Jaffa where I live if Hamas were to win this war.
Not to mention the north.
And the north, believe me, everywhere. So so what we've done now is we've accepted temporary ceasefire. So the world is going to say, well, you've accepted a 5-day ceasefire. Why not a 10-day ceasefire? Why not a 15-day ceasefire? Why not a permanent ceasefire? People are already saying that. So there were tremendous dangers in the temporary ceasefires. Now Israel has to start perhaps renewing the combat. Very difficult. Very difficult.
Okay, so it's just, in other words, this extremely difficult juncture. Nobody in Israel is foolish. They knew that agreeing up front was going to bring to this day. And I don't know if you have felt, or you remain in the States. If you felt I feel that I have the kind of tightening of the screws toward just that position, something like, now there's a ceasefire, and and as the average person in the American public, I don't think thinks in nuanced terms. It's the ceasefire. Why is Israel violating it? I assume there's some strategic thought for how to try to position that exigency with Israel's allies in the world community, and there's a firestorm coming of public outcry. Yes, it's no surprise.
You say the word ceasefire, and it sounds great. Of course,
no, why cessation of hostilities. Did I say ceasefire? I'm sorry, I meant to say cessation of hostilities, but you know what I mean.
Why not have a ceasefire? To say that a ceasefire is for us is just the opposite of what it sounds like.
Right.
Ceasefire means that we never are ceasing fire. It means that we go on with this conflict. And, you have to sort of reframe the discussion. This is about a chance not for Israel.
Very hard thing to do.
Well, one thing to do is to say, listen, we're fighting for the liberation, not just of Israel, we're fighting for the liberation of the Palestinians from Hamas. And that's difficult to do because Hamas still attracts a tremendous amount of support from the Palestinians. A recent poll showed that 83% of the Palestinians in the West Bank support Hamas, and 65% in Gaza still support Hamas.
And if anything, buoyed by the perception that they're the ones who have instigated the release of the 3 times political prisoners back in Israel. Yeah. So,
and they're fighting the evil Zionists. That they get the credit. It's interesting. The Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, came out last week and said, "Hey, we were in that October 7th attack too. Don't forget, our men were there too." Right. They're taking credit too. Not only they're not condemn it, they're praising it. They think it's great.
Right.
So these are our presumptive peace partners. That's the problem. But I've been trying in my recent talks, in my recent interviews, I was twice on the TV this morning, to reframe the discussion that everyone's calling for Israel to have a ceasefire. Why isn't anybody calling for Hamas to surrender? Because I said, listen, the war ends in 1 second. The minute Hamas lays down its arms, that's easy. How about saying that? Yes. And how about Hamas giving up the hostages and saying, "Okay, we quit"? So that's an important way of reframing the war, because it is true. It is true. Once Hamas lays down its arms, they surrender. We could either imprison some of them or send, exile somebody on a boat to some horrible place like Libya and Algeria, and if we get the hostages back, I think the majority of Israelis would go along with that.
All right, one last question from within Israel. So the cessation of hostilities, as I understood it, included a daily 6-hour suspension of surveillance that it seemed to me was an opportunity, maybe even designed as an opportunity for Hamas to regroup and resupply. Is that the understanding within Israel about what it's for? And is there any way of knowing whether, as each day passes, they are able to somewhat refortify?
Yeah, that was always a mystery to me, that 6-hour pause in the drone surveillance. Hamas explained that they needed to be able to get the hostages from one place to another without showing the Israelis, where they were hidden. Get that? But we all know that we're going to use
don't even know where they are necessarily.
Yeah. And what they're going to use those 6 hours for is moving terrorists from the north to the south, because that's where all the Palestinians are, and they want to keep using their own people as human shields, and the shields have run away. They're going to go where the shields are. Okay. My gut instinct tells me that there are other ways of surveillance, and not the least of which from our American friends who have a lot of hardware up in space.
Okay, so you think that as a practical matter, other than modest refurbishing, that at least the temporary period so far hasn't permitted substantial regrouping of Hamas? Or I know that
I don't know. I don't know. I'm always assuming the worst, and that the regrouping is in fact substantial. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I wanted to talk more broadly now about Israel's position, in the world, and to how it's become so vilified. I don't think is too strong a word, especially on the left. I can think of that as a possible pivot point where Israel moved from underdog to overdog. This is obviously a whole book in of itself, but just generally, what happened that this, idealistic, people-saving project turned into, in the eyes of, well, that's part of the question, in the eyes of folks, this, colonial, invasive, oppressive power. How did they become the bad guys in broad terms? Do you have thoughts about that?
Oh, I have many.
Yeah.
Let's start with the one I've had recently.
I know you might dispute the premise. I would dispute the premise, but
not at all.
It's true. So I'd like, what the hell happened to, Eretz Yisrael?
Well, let me start at the end. I've been traveling around the United States. I've been in about a dozen cities in the last couple of weeks. And I'm coming to the end of this trip now. I'm on my last legs, both figuratively and physically. And I've come away with some very, very profound conclusions. And one of I think the most disturbing conclusion is that the Holocaust never ended. It's true that Nazi Germany was defeated. Auschwitz was liberated and destroyed. That part of the Holocaust ended, but the worldview that enabled the Holocaust to occur, and that is the systematic and massive dehumanization of the Jewish people, is going on right now before our eyes. Right now before our eyes. That 1,200 members of any other group on Earth who were butchered, beheaded, burnt, eviscerated, raped repeatedly, children, old people taken into captivity, anybody else on Earth, that would elicit sympathy, understanding, and condemnation. What we see is just the opposite. Not only is Hamas being exonerated, it's being praised, and we are being accused of being genocidal. It's just the opposite. And we are not people. We are white colonial settlers. None of this is historically accurate. In fact, we weren't sent by any government, any government, any country to exploit another country. We were coming home to our country. All right, and actually, we fought against imperialism to gain our independence against Britain, and succeeded. And the majority of people in the state of Israel are indigenous to the Middle East. They aren't foreign at all. They were what you would call in this country people of color. and that's quite apart from the 21% of the population that are Arab, and the hundreds of thousands of Ethiopian Jews. We are a nation largely of color. I'm the odd man out, right? And so all of us is, you don't have to, it is utter falsehoods, but all around utter falsehoods. Calling Hamas a national liberation organization is a falsehood. Hamas doesn't even see itself as a national liberation organization. It's an Islamist organization. Its national liberation for Hamas is a means to a higher end, which is the recreation of the medieval caliphate throughout the Middle East and then the world. So everything is false. But we are in a post-factual world where Jews are they are white settlers, exploiters, racist, apartheid state. That's only on the left. There's also on the right, where we are money grubbing and controlling the markets. And this is classic anti-Semitism. Classic anti-Semitism is where Jews are always the ultimate evil other, no matter what they are. So if you're a capitalist, Jews are communists. If you're a cosmopolitan, Jews are nationalists. If you're a nationalist, Jews are cosmopolitan. It goes back and forth. Okay. And that's what you see between the right and the left. We're the only ethnic religious group that is hated by both the right and the left. So you'll see, demonstrations of queers for Hamas, LGBT people, women feminists for Hamas. I mean, it is beyond surreal, but surreality has a certain comic quality. There's nothing comic about this. And this is what I mean by the continuation of the Holocaust. This is precisely how the Holocaust came about, through massive determination, dehumanization of the Jews. And it's happening everywhere. I've traveled around Jewish communities in the United States now, and in every community I see fear. I see fear and disbelief, and a sense of despondency, how to react, how to fight this. When it's interesting, I was just listening to a commentary on TV about the Biden administration came out with a very big program to combat anti-Semitism last May, but fell far short of saying that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism, and devoted maybe a line and a half of a very long document to anti-Semitism from the left, to the anti-Semitism going on campuses. And we've seen, people have been unwilling to face this. And there's a sense of despondency here. One thing Hamas has made abundantly clear, it has made abundantly clear that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism, because all you have to do is listen to the people chanting, the people pro-Palestinian, pro-demonstrators chanting "Gas the Jews, send them to Auschwitz." There's your answer. And I think it's also taught American Jews that what they thought, many of them who believe that you can fight anti-Semitism through education, that someone made an anti-Semitic remark, it was an educational moment. I don't think anybody thinks they can educate the people who are saying, from the river to the sea, let's wipe out the state of Israel. It's not an educational moment. You have to fight them. You fight them legally. You fight them legislatively. You fight them in the new media. You fight them in a Churchillian sense everywhere you can fight them, but you have to fight. And it's not just explaining. So it's quite a moment. It is truly a watershed moment. But the basic realization I've had is that the Holocaust never ended.
So, wow. And it really has. So it's really been a realization for you. In other words, you, like many, you grew up in America, but like many Jews here, actually saw the most virulent anti-Semitism as having been passed and conquered, literally, until this last month is what opened your that's a very fundamental shift in views about the world for someone in your position. But that's so I just want to underscore. So that's your analysis here, because let me bear down a little bit more, just in an attempt to understand. So the Holocaust was perpetrated by people who were very proud and pronouncing the inferiority of the Jew, everything you said, and the need to exterminate. The left is full of people who would be not 80% of them who would deny adamantly and take great offense at the notion that they are quote unquote anti-Semitic. They would point to other factors. The proof that you point out, that, well, wait a second, what about the 300,000 people in Syria, or why is it always special rules for Israel? I think that's a very strong method of proof, but I want to just sort of understand how you see it as having arisen. Is it just that the most virulent anti-Semitism just is in the bones of civilization and just waiting to spring out, or so that you really don't distinguish between the kind of anti-Semitism today on the left and the previous one? I'm actually being incoherent in this question. Let me just say, what is it, and when was it, as you see it, that all these misconceptions about Israel came into being, especially on the left?
Now, let me be clear about the dehumanization. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, the people who perpetrated the Holocaust thought themselves a superior race. The Jews were an inferior race. They had to be extinguished. But what preceded that was the dehumanization, when Jews were compared to rats and to termites and to cockroaches. By the way, that's what precedes any genocide. And the same thing happened in genocides in Africa. They were people, the various tribes were compared to cockroaches and rats, and that's laying the groundwork for genocide. But you see it now. This is the groundwork. And whether you're on the right and you accuse Israel of being a race that's trying to take over America, or trying to bring in immigrants to take down America, that's the new one, replacement theory, or on the left and think that we are illegitimate white colonial settlers, racist, the effect is the same. The effect is to dehumanize us and render 1,200 people who were brutally, mercilessly murdered as not innocent victims, but actually people who had it coming to them at best, and that the people who perpetrated that massacre were freedom fighters. That's what's going on here. And that, to me, smacks of the Holocaust all over it. How did it happen? How did it happen on the right, on the left? I think anti-Semitism is a force in the world. It's been a force in the world for about 2,500 years. It predates Christianity. And there's something endemic in much of the human condition about anti-Semitism. And it like any virus, it can be stirred, it can be stimulated to come to about the surface through economic dislocations, by wars, by confusion. And there's a tremendous amount of confusion in the world today, much of it stirred up by the internet, what's real and what isn't real, and trying to grasp onto a very simple narrative, good and evil. I'm a spiritual person. I also think that the anti-Semitism is the way that evil works in the world. Yeah. And what we're seeing now is evil. And that doesn't mean that people even know they're evil. I just listened to you're in San Diego. I just listened to the minutes of a city town meeting from Oakland, California, where they voted on a resolution to condemn Israel and praise basically Hamas for what's happened. And you have to listen to the various assembly people speaking. And then you will come away, as I have, to understand that this is evil in the world, that there's no other explanation for it. Because when people say that Hamas is a freedom fighting organization and there are no innocent Israelis, and a 3-year-old girl, a 9-month-old baby deserve this, then you realize it's something beyond mere sickness. There's something spiritually broken here, but deeply broken. And it takes a person of great moral clarity to see that. That's how deep it is. And what we have is someone in the form of, say, Joe Biden, who comes out of a spiritual world and sees evil and recognizes evil. That doesn't mean he doesn't have criticism of Israel. He has criticism of Israel, but he knows. He knows the difference between good and evil. These people do not. They have actually confused evil for good. And that's a spiritual state. It's not a political state. It's not even a psychological state. It's very different. And these are conclusions I've come to after a month of traveling kind of crazily here.
Yeah, must be a rough way to leave. And I'll just add that during the war, during the Second World War, Israel was vilified as weak, but the notion of there being the rich, successful, conspiratorial cabal within society. So successful, I think, is a very old trope as well. All right, let me. I mean, I think that's really significant, Michael, that you're seeing, the basic engine here as being a 2,500-year-old virus, which suggests, it emerges and then and recedes, but never really goes away. I would also add, I've had some of the best essays I've read make very persuasive accounts of how anti-Semitism is the first step in a kind of moral opaqueness that really does threaten the rest of the civilized world. But that really, it's a hard argument for Jews in particular to make, but it really seems true historically. Let me
Oh, I think it's pointing at something very corrupt here, something that's gone wrong in American society.
Yeah.
But it's happening not just in America. And you could go back to the youth revolutions of the 60s and the Marxism and the socialism.
Please do.
And
Please do
you
try
can go
to,
back
because these are the people who are out there, I think see themselves as inheritors of the Woodstock generation in some bizarre way. So
not bizarre at all. Not bizarre at all. It's actually historically accurate.
Peace and love,
The youth revolutions of the 60s, many of them led by Jews, as you know, right?
Right.
Abbie Hoffman, and
right. Yeah.
etc. Right, Jerry Rubin, all these people, they had these Marxist, anti-colonialist ideologies. They tried to export them beyond the campuses, and they didn't succeed in the 60s. So they went back into the campuses and they closed the gates behind them. And they spent the next couple of generations building generations of professors who thought as they did. And those professors instilled their belief in their students. And then the gates opened up again. And those students became the head of industries. They became in government. It was very, very well done. I know people who ascribe this to an actual plan of the Soviet Union. And we'll see what's occurring in the United States. They call it the posthumous victory of the Soviet Union over the United States. Is that it was to instill doubt in the American consciousness that America was good, that America was a force for good in the world, and to undermine the self-confidence of this country. And it worked very, very well. If that indeed was a Soviet plan, it worked very well. I don't know. I'm not big on conspiracies, but this is indeed what happened because I lived through it. I was on those campuses. I've taught in those campuses. I saw it happen, opposite, really be my eyes. A professor sent me something from a respected university the other day in the philosophy department. Said he sent a questionnaire to 200 faculty members, asking them the following question: can you think of a context in which the massacre of 1,200 innocent people, beheading, mutilating, raping 1,200 people, is there a context where that would be just? And then asking them, is it justified if it happens to Israeli Jews? Of that 200 members of his faculty, only 4 said that you could not find a context to justify this. That's extraordinary. That is extraordinary. That's going on in the universities. These are the people who are enlightened. Listen, it happened in German universities in the 30s too. People like Heidegger became Nazis. How did some of the most intelligent people we know become out and out Jew haters who can lay the groundwork for a Holocaust? You see it happening here in America.
Okay,
so,
and just let me zero in. So Heidegger, your quick response would be anti-Semitism lay in his bosom and just waiting for certain political triggers to flourish. Basically, that would be
That is what I believe is happening here.
All right,
and people may not even know they're anti-Semitic. They'll deny to high heaven they're anti-Semitic. I'm not even sure that if you asked Heidegger whether he was anti-Semitic, he would have said that. Yeah. Really, he would have said, "Yeah, the Nazis have this little thing with Jews, but basically, I'm about being German, being proud German."
Yes.
I think that I will quote Larry Summers, former president of Harvard, who said, these people are anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent. I kind of think they have a lot of intent too.
Yeah. All right.
And by the way, for Jews, it's irrelevant. Whether it's an anti-Semitism in effect or an intent, for Jews, it's irrelevant. Because for us, the outcome is exactly the same. The outcome would be Holocaust.
So I want to sort of go to different sort of parts of the world and get your sense of things. And let's start with Biden in the United States. I mean, definitely the music, if not the words, even the words, has been less pro-Israel of late. Assertions that there have been excessive um, death in among Palestinian people and the like. Is it? But obviously, that what underlies that is a very sophisticated sense among both the American foreign policy government and Israel. Do you feel now confident, notwithstanding the public prevarication, I think it's not too strong a word, that the solid support of the United States remains a given, and that when hostilities resume, the U.S. will have Israel's back?
I think it will. I think it'll be increasingly difficult. I think there may be, also, daily requests for Israel to show restraint, particularly in firing and fighting in civilian areas, to increase the amount of aid going in, all of that. But so far, even many progressive members of Congress haven't signed on for this demand for a ceasefire.
Mm.
How long that can be maintained, I don't know, because this war could go on for a very long time. And unless we can discover where the hostages are. And believe me, I know that there are, immense Israeli assets that have been devoted to this 24/7 to find out where they are, so we can rescue them, because we do have the special forces to rescue them. I have to proceed on the assumption that support is not open-ended. It's not, there's an expiration date on it. I don't know where it is. I don't know what triggers it, but there is an
What
expiration
about?
date.
I mean,
An
Michael,
expiration date would be. Go ahead. I would say
well,
that,
you're a
if a
sophisticated
plague
political
broke out.
observer of both the U.S. Scene and Israel. You've surely noticed the astonishing, at least as polls go, expression of disapproval for Biden among young people, and the suggestion, in a close election, that cohort could cost them. How do you factor in, Biden has expressed this struggle in the terms you said, in sort of Manichaean terms. There's good and there's evil, and made it suggest that what has to be done has to be done. But we're going into political season where he is in many polls behind the putative Republican nominee. That has to be worrisome development for Israel. Yeah.
Well, we don't know. We don't know who he's going to lose to. If he were to lose, and there are some.
No, I'm talking
Republican
about
candidates
his
very
possibly
pro-Israel.
temporizing in 24 because of the election.
Well, that's the remarkable thing about this man. He hasn't so far.
Yeah.
I always quote Joe Biden, what he used to tell me, because I spent a significant amount of time with him. He used to always quote his father. And his father used to say to him, never crucify yourself on a small cross. He is crucifying himself on a very large cross. And that cross is us. And we have to be appreciative of that. We have to try to help him to help us as much as we can. We can't agree to an open-ended ceasefire. I don't know if he even wants that. But he's really crucifying himself here. And it's something that historians will write about. I'll write about it. I have never seen anything. I've been in U.S.-Israel relationships, I don't know how to tell you long, as a practitioner, as an historian, for 50 years. And I've never seen anything like this.
And your view is he's just deeply internalized the good versus evil lesson that people in Oakland have transposed. Yeah, I mean it's at that basic moral level.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. What we're witnessing is, you think this is just a military battle. You think this is a military between Israel and Hamas, but no, it's a battle between civilization and darkness, and it is very much a spiritual battle. And it's taken me 2 months to sort of understand this completely. And you see the forces of good and evil allied, and it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary to see. We are, as human beings, I think, we are in a moment of revelation. And it almost sounds like, I always like an evangelical Christian talking
End
about
of days,
Armageddon,
right?
right? The end of days. It's not the end of days, but we are being shown. We are being shown. If you are a believer, we are being shown a great contest between good and evil.
All right, but
And
your view, to be clear, is that that is Biden's prism as well. That's what really explains his steadfastness and his willingness to be
yeah, he
crucified on
is.
a big cross.
Yeah, but keep in mind, he is also an American president and he's a Democratic president, which means he's going to go out there and say we have to have a two-state solution when this is over, and the Palestinian Authority has to be involved in it. Now, 90 to 95% of Israeli Jews are going to oppose that. As my family tends to be left of center, they listen to that and they say, "Is he crazy? You're going to take Mahmoud Abbas and make him the president of a Palestinian state in the West Bank? He won't even stand for re-election because he knows Hamas is going to win. That whole Palestinian state is going to fall to Hamas in a matter of weeks, and we'll have Hamas not just in Gaza, we'll have it on the other side, on the West Bank as well. We'll be dead. That's an existential threat." Okay, next. This administration and the previous Democratic administration bear a huge responsibility for what's happened by building up Iran, by legitimizing Iran, by enriching Iran, by putting daylight between the United States and its traditional Middle Eastern allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I have not seen anybody in the administration come out and said we made a mistake and we're changing. Not that. Even as American troops are being fired at every single day, and sometimes several times a day, by Iranian proxy groups. And that to me, and America continues to pay to Iran. that to me is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. It's also deeply and profoundly irresponsible. Who was it? Thomas Wolfe. Not Tom Wolfe, Thomas Wolfe, who wrote back in the first paragraph of Look,
Look Homeward Angel, yeah.
Where he writes that that the hanging in Texas today began in a love affair in ancient Greece 5,000 years ago. Yeah. You can always look back for a beginning. All right, where does it begin? But I know for a fact that during the Obama years, there was an attempt to pivot to Iran and away from America's traditional Israeli and Sunni allies, with the notion that America wanted to disengage from the Middle East. It wasn't dependent on Middle Eastern oil anymore, wanted to get out of there. And the way that many people thought in the administration to get out of there was to sort of appease Iran and to try to transform Iran into what was called the responsible regional power. And the whole project backfired. Not only did it destabilize the Middle East and cause wars, but it actually resulted in once again entangling the United States and the Middle East. That's what these two aircraft carrier groups are doing there. That is a direct result of that policy of empowering Iran. That's what happens. And
all right.
Nobody in the administration is going to say that. Okay, but I say this out of love for Joe Biden, because I really do appreciate. I do think he sees good and evil, but he is still a president. He is still a Democrat, and those two carrier groups. And listen to what I'm going to say right now. Those two that are there to deter Iran and Hezbollah, but they're also there to deter us, and deter us from taking on Hezbollah and Iran, which we must do at some point if we're to survive.
Wow, yeah, that's quite a sort of chess move there. But I see what you mean. All right, well, so you're bringing up of Obama administration policy and talking about Biden. It necessarily invokes the name Donald Trump, who in my some of my job is such a focus that I'm always eager to leave him behind. But let me just say, I do think that there was sentiment among thoughtful people who understood his phenomenal historic constitutional failings, that he was better for Israel than was Obama, or he had some support there that surprised me, but I came to understand. What about now? He seems on the one, he said some very erratic, irresponsible things that said, if I were president, this never would have, October 7th never would have happened, etc. Do you have a sense of the view of Trump in Israel now, especially as we contemplate some possibility, hopefully small, I say as an American patriot, that he will return to office. But Trump, Israel, what's the current sort of thinking?
I think Israelis are politically very sophisticated. They understand that the Trump of his first term won't be the Trump of the second term. The second term is going to be about revenge. That the senior Jewish advisors around him are all gone. The Zionists around him are not there. I don't know if Israelis share the trepidation that I share, because I see the possible meeting of this mass dehumanization of Jews, the anti-Semitism in this country, with an administration that may give a certain amount of dog whistle license to that hatred, and that is a perfect storm for American Jews. And I don't know if even American Jews are contemplating this actively yet, but I am. With trepidation. And you understand what I'm saying?
100%. And the right-wing views that you summarized, to me, talked like MAGA, those sorts of resentments. Okay, so that's very helpful.
And yet, I have met no small amount of pro-Trump Jews. And I'm always interested in hearing them and understanding why, because these are very smart people. Why? Because for the life of me, I can't understand it.
Right.
I can't. Listen, I think a lot of it has to do with immigration policies. And even the very liberal members of my family are fed up with Democrats about immigration. Several members of my family work in the healthcare system, and see has been completely, undermined by this policy. From what they tell me, I don't know that firsthand. And I think that many of them would be open to a moderate Republican now. This is in a family where if there was ever a Republican, that Republican was deep in the basement and never dared to come out. And now it's being discussed around family tables. So whether it be, I don't know, it's not so much DeSantis, but certainly, Nikki Haley. And a particular hero on my family tables is Liz Cheney. And who I know all these people. I'm not name dropping. This is what I did for a living.
Right.
And I know them to be responsible people. Responsible, very intelligent people. So, but Donald Trump frightens me.
Yeah. Look, I know a small number of people who have that same view, this policy or that, but the defects, this isn't about Trump, but so to me, swamp, I don't know, such a higher or maybe more fundamental level that, those arguments always kind of leave me cold, literally. All right, but I want to really touch on at least other important areas of the world. So now, today, where do you see Europe, and how much does it matter? We understand the importance of the U.S. What about Europe?
Europe is transforming very fast before our eyes. So, when I was in government, this is 5, 6, 7 years ago, the Europeans used to condemn us every day. On the basis of consensus of the EU, 28 nations would vote against us. It's gone. It's not just that you have the emergence of the European right in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, in Poland, even in Austria, but now it's gone into Western Europe as well. In Italy, most recently now in the Netherlands with the election of Wilders, and in Great Britain and in France, where Marine Le Pen is more popular than Macron now. Because the Europeans understand something, and they understand that if we lose this war, they're next. Now, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. I don't want anybody to love us because they hate Muslims. I always say, if you hate Muslims, don't come to us with your love. We don't want your love. And that's certainly true of Mr. Wilders. I've met him, and I'm uncomfortable. I actually told him that, just what I told you just now. If you love us because you hate Muslims, I'm not interested in your love. But it had the effect of giving European support to us that we didn't have before, and certainly more support in many European countries than we get in Oakland, California. So there's a low bar, but there it's not so much good and evil; it's the way they see of preserving their identity. I mean, Wilders was elected to preserve Dutch identity, which increasing number of people in the Netherlands think is threatened by Muslim immigrants.
All right, and how much? So that's where it is. How much of a shot in the arm is it in the overall geopolitical struggle about Israel?
Well, it's important if someone tries to impose a boycott or a sanctions against us. I mean, it
Yeah.
was only what was it in 2015, 16? I was meeting with French leaders and protesting the fact that France was labeling Israeli products, and I was trying to show them that this was basically anti-Semitic. I don't think France is going to be doing that anymore. Netherlands definitely not going to be doing this, and it's also, by the way, it's spreading in certain ways to South America with the election of the new president in Argentina, who
Yeah.
thinks he may convert to Judaism. It is a highly dynamic.
He's been portrayed in brief terms as Trumpian, but
They lump them all together. Anybody
Yeah.
who is of this ilk is Trumpian. Okay,
Right.
It's the ultimate shortcut. It's not understanding what's going on here. What's going on here are profound historical processes, and many legitimate fears. Part of that immigrant population in Europe doesn't assimilate. And I remember when there was, during the Mavi Marmara affair in 2010, the attempted flotilla to break through to Gaza, there were Turkish protests throughout Western Europe, people flying the Turkish flag. And these were not immigrants, these were the sons and grandsons of immigrants. I have I live in a rented apartment. My landlords live in Malbo, Sweden. There's a very high immigrant population, and my landlord's a dentist. He says to me that he gets people who don't speak Swedish, and when he asks them, they're born in Sweden, they don't speak Swedish, and they've told him, I'm quoting him, "We don't have to learn Swedish. You're going to learn Arabic." So this is what people making people vote for the right. That kind of fear. Now, this is not to taint that entire, population of the immigrant pressures is as radical or Islamist or unassimilable. Many of them want to live as good Dutchmen or good Swedish people, good Swedes. But there is the fear, and that's what's animating this swing rightward. I don't even would call it rightward. I don't know if right and left is the right word. It's
so true. Such an excellent, important point. Fascism just assumes
you could be
the National Socialist Party, whatever.
You can be anti-immigration and be, a socialist.
Yeah,
you can.
All right. Briefly, then, to talk about the Middle East, it does seem to me that there's been a softening. It's hard to call it warming, but of certain intractable opposition among some neighbors of Israel, may be driven by mutual fear of Iran. But how do you see the war in its sort of tangible impact on cold alliances within, but very useful ones within the Middle East for Israel?
The heads of these Arab countries, they understand that they're caught in a bind between Sunni extremism in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Shiite extremism in the form of Iran and Hezbollah. There's only one country that's fighting both of them actively right now. That's us. That's us. And so while the populations of these countries may be flagrantly anti-Israel, and the leaders of the countries may have to give lip service because these aren't democracies, they're afraid, behind the scenes, they're going to be very supportive. And I think that if we are strong and if we beat Hamas, then we'll see that we will have peace with Saudi Arabia as well, because people quite naturally, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere, people respect strength. So we have to win, because winning will bring about peace. It's that, that strange twist. If you give war a chance, you'll actually get peace. If you don't give war a peace, you're just going to get more war.
Michael Oren, thank you so much for all the time you've spent with us. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.